Right. Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's take a breath. It's good to be together today, yes? Amen. So I want to talk today, a continuation of what we started last week. Our theme for the month of September is about love in action today, connecting to the larger theme of stewardship for our planet, ensuring stewardship for the planet, which is the next in the series of prophetic justice principles that we've been focusing on all year long as part of our theme of spirituality in action. And last week I talked about love, dominion, and east of Eden. If you weren't here, we went deep. And I realized that, sometimes I drop some stuff on you, and I go home and I go, wow, that was maybe too much. Not for us. That's it, right. But last night I was praying on today, and I went, I need to back up a little bit and go over that again, because there was some good stuff in there. But before I get too far in that review, in speaking of stewardship of our planet and putting love in action, I'm so grateful that we have a spiritual community that cares about the world in which we live and is connected to it and takes action. And this morning I was greeted by our head of practitioners, Baji Daniels, who said, I want to take the lead on figuring out where the most appropriate and most effective place is to direct our donations for the rebuilding of the Bahamas. So know that will be coming. Yeah, right? So thank you, Baji. That we will, at the appropriate time, announce what because it gets our attention, and we want to do something immediately, right? But what I know is that the Bahamas are going to need some help for a long time, and we want to make sure that we find the most appropriate and most effective way for us to contribute to. So I'm grateful that prayer was answered already. The prayer is answered even before you speak it. Amen? So we will announce that at the right and perfect time. And so today, as we continue then talking about how we take this idea of stewardship for our planet and putting love in action. If God is love and love is all there is, because God is all there is, then how do we direct that? How do we allow ourselves to be in the activity of expressing love? Ernest Holmes says about our connection with nature. This comes out of his first book called Creative Mind. He says, we must learn then how to appreciate nature and nature's God. Spend as much time in the out of doors as possible. Look up at the stars. Let them be your companion. Tread the pathless ways of the trees and the giant forest, and see God in everything that you look upon. The God of everywhere, right? Stay connected to that infinite intelligence and presence, which is what I refer to God as, right? God is not a he, not a she. It's beyond the binary constructs of our human limited language. It is the infinite wisdom of the ages, expressed as he and expressed as she and expressed as everything in between and beyond that. Yes? And so stay connected with that. And that's where we pick up the thread from last week. Because last week I shared a story out of the Old Testament, out of Genesis, about Cain and Abel. And I confessed to you all last week that I've always considered myself sort of a New Thought Christian. And I've realized over the years as I've dived deeper and deeper, particularly into the liberation path and liberation stories found in Genesis and Exodus, that I spend more time in from a Christian perspective, would be called the Old Testament, or from a more appropriate perspective, would be called the Torah, the wisdom books of the Bible, that I'm really a New Thought Jew, so I'm newish. I have a bit more of a rabbinical approach than a Christian approach per se. So when you go, there he goes again with the Bible. It's a rabbinical, New Thought rabbinical approach, all right? So we talked about Cain and Abel as a very important story because there's a principle that I read everything through. And that principle is that context informs content. Context informs content, right? So the content of what we're reading in scriptures, or the context of what we're reading in anything that we interact with on our daily life, the context around that helps shape and inform that content. And the context of these ancient stories, in particular this one, Cain and Abel, that the Genesis stories are written hundreds of years after, right? We talked last week, these are not stenographer notes of time going by as it's happening, right? These are written, by the way, the order of things. So just real quick, Bible 101, right? Real quick, Exodus is actually written first, because as they are kicked out in 600 to 500 BCE, as they're wondering how the heck did we get here again, they begin to write their story, their narrative, their history. They realize that it's going to be important for us, or to our survival, to capture our history. So they begin putting down these stories that they've grown up for generations hearing and telling each other. And then they decide, well, you know what, we should probably, it's as if I were to cast the books of the Bible as a movie, there's a fun thing to play with for a minute, right? It's kind of like what's happened lately in all the adventure movies, where we have the adventure, we have Star Wars. I grew up with Star Wars, right? It came out when I was a kid. And then all of a sudden you get all the backstories. And then you get the backstories behind the backstories. We get the prequels and the da-da-das, and you get the sequels, but then now you got to go back. And so, like Exodus would be sort of, first, one of the first big books that would get our attention. And then we might jump forward and talk about some New Testament stuff. And then you get the prequel movie, right? And the prequel movie would be Genesis. It would be like, let's back up a second and really try to understand where this is all coming from. And there's a lot of particular nuanced stories in there. And one has to ask yourself, why is there such a particular story when the context in which they're being written, they're trying to inform something collectively about their people, their society, and where they're going? And the answer to that question is that the universal is found in the particular. The universal is found in the particular. So one, context informs content. Second, the universal is found in the particular, meaning we can enter a particular story, in this case, Cain and Abel, as a particular characters with names and their fathers and genealogy and all of that, but we're not interested really in any of that. That's all just window dressing for the universal principle that lies behind it, right? The authors say, the reason I want to tell you about Cain and Abel is because it has something to do with us. Nothing to do with them, but something, if them even existed, but something to do with us collectively, right? So you have to have, and by the way, just going back to that movie thing for a minute, because that's really fun. Exodus would be sort of a weird movie, right? Because you got your star, Moses, and the whole point of the movie is to get to the promised land, and then, of course, he doesn't get there. So it'd be like this Quentin Tarantino kind of weird thing where, like coming up over the hill to get there, and then boom, the screen just goes black. Roll the credits. Right? So you have to have anyway. Yes, I just referenced Quentin Tarantino to biblical scholarship. Put that on your bingo card. Remember, Holmes is the free square. So let's take a look then again a little bit more, this Cain and Abel story, this particular story that has a universal message in terms of the intent of the authors to get the attention of a group of people that find themselves hundreds of years after the story would have actually taken place. The story, as we talked last week, Cain is the city dweller. Cain is the farmer. Abel is the nomadic brother. He's the one that is the hunter and gatherer. So there's a reference to two kinds of ways of being. And the story is not a rebuke against farming. It's not a rebuke against civilization. It's not a rebuke against city living, because the authors make the point to say that God asked for an offering, and Cain, they both give an offering, and God favors Cain's offering. So he makes the point right up front. Like, I'm not saying, right, because the train has left the station in terms of, are we going to be nomadic people or are we going to be city-dwelling people? You understand what I'm saying? That train has left that's not what the story is about, because it's written hundreds of years after the settlement of humanity, after they've done the nomadic hunting and gathering society, and they've lived now for hundreds of years in cities as farmers and as producers of good and storing that good. So it's not a rebuke on city life, but rather it's a story that says two things really important. One, don't forget where you came from. And two, as you build cities and as you multiply and as you expand and as you get bigger, more and more impersonal in how you organize yourselves, remember that how you treat one another is really, really important. How you treat one another is really, really important. And so we find that Cain murders Abel, and it's a story that reminds us of the divorce in our city life, in our big city dwelling society, that we've divorced ourselves or cut ourselves off from nature. We've forgotten where we've come from. And last week I said, what happens energetically? We take a breath and take a break from the Bible story for a moment, right? What happens energetically when we become disconnected from the root chakra? When we forget our mother, when we forget the land. Dis-ease, right? All kinds of trouble begins to happen when we're disconnected, and it shows up in a dis-ease and a discomfort and a dysfunction of our not only our relationship with each other, our relationship with ourselves, our in human sexuality, in all of those things, right, that are connected to the root chakra. And so that's the first part of the story, is to say, remember you came from the land. And remember in Genesis, remember I made you, and I made you stewards. I gave you dominion, which we talked last week was about. I gave you responsibility for this thing that we've created here, and how you treat each other is really, really important. Because what happens when you go from farming to, or you go from nomadic living to farming? There's something that happens. You have to kind of lay over the, again, contextual lens of what happens in human development. You become farmers, you can develop a surplus. When you develop a surplus, the population could grow. When the population grows, then you need a government or a system of control of that surplus. And so suddenly there's a body of politic that is involved in how we're living with each other. You following what I'm saying? And so the story's written when that has fallen apart, when they've been kicked out again, when they've been overthrown, taken over, and the tribes have been dispersed throughout the land. And so the authors are saying, maybe we need to go back and remember how best to do this city-dwelling life, because we just lost it all. And so there's a particular story that says, remember where you came from, and remember how you treat each other is really, really important. The punishment for Cain, as we covered last week, is to wander. Right? If you farm and try to produce something from the land, it's not going to produce anything, and so you need to wander until you find God again. We see that metaphor over and over again. Moses has to wander, become a nomadic sheep herder in order to find God. We find the crowds following Jesus are wandering in the desert. The tribe of Israelites with Moses are wandering in the desert. We find wandering in order to find ourselves, to remember who we are, and then to remember our connection with each other. And so sometimes as we enter this particular, we find the universal, and to expand a little bit more now to the universal, our founder and teacher, Ernest Holmes, would say that the first law of the universe is the law of harmony. The first law of the universe is the law of harmony. That is that if God is all there is, and that God is an expression of love and divine intelligence, then everything works in a harmonic resonance with itself. So the first law of the universe is harmony, which is instructive to us to say anywhere where there isn't harmony happening, that's an instruction to get back into harmony. Right? It's a road sign to say, how do I bring this back into harmony for a moment? The Transcendentalists brought us a great gift in New Thought in connecting our spirituality with nature. And Ralph Waldo Emerson reminds us that nature is made to conspire with spirit to emancipate us. I love that line. Nature is made to conspire with spirit to emancipate us. And so today I want to talk about how we enter into that emancipation, how we enter into that act of remembrance of love in action through the individual and as communities. Through the individual and as communities. Which one should I do first? This is a choose your own adventure sermon. Community. Let's do community first. The good news, you remember those books? I remember. I had those as a kid. You had to choose at the end of the chapter. Now, where does the character go? Choose A, then turn to this page. B. Anybody? No? They were so much fun. So community first. Well, the good news is the answer to both is the same. Because the answer to how we remember each other and our connection with the divine and as community, and the answer to how we remember each other and remember the divine as individuals, and the format that we use for that process of emancipation and connection and transformation is exactly the same. And that answer is prayer. That answer is prayer. Why is it prayer? Because prayer changes everything. Prayer changes. Let me just remember who I am, where we are here for a second. This is not a TED Talk. Prayer changes everything. Now, why does prayer... Yay, there we go. Don't get me started. You get me bouncing, it's going to be over. Penelope on the B3 patch and the organ. Prayer changes everything. Why does prayer change everything? It's not because it's magic. It's not because it's hocus pocus. Right? Prayer changes everything, not because it's fanciful. Prayer changes everything, not because it just makes us feel better. Prayer changes everything because it changes consciousness. And consciousness is everything. You see, when we talk about the environment, we talk about being a good steward of the environment, when we talk about nature, the first law of nature is the law of harmony, then we can see everywhere in the world where there is a disharmony with Mother Nature, disharmony with our relationship with the earth, disharmony with how we're extracting resources and degrading and mistreating our planet in a way that is harming us, right? If love is all there is, and the first law of nature is harmony, then the way that we change anything is the way that we change everything, which is through consciousness. And our formula for changing consciousness is prayer. It's prayer, right? Because everything that is holding the environment hostage, everything that is holding humanity hostage to its greater good, everything that is all of the activities, the greed, our dependency on fossil fuels, our dependency on plastic, our dependency on beef, all of those things, right, are all held in place by an idea. They're all just forms of consciousness. And so if the form of consciousness that is holding those things in place, if what's holding that thing in place is an idea or a form of consciousness, then the way we change consciousness is prayer. It's the way we change everything, because the first law of Mother Nature is harmony. There's already a base underneath us. There's already a Mother Earth. There's already a divine intelligence that knows how to tend to itself and knows how to be in right relationship with us. There's already a Mother Earth that knows how to produce enough food to feed everybody. There's already systems in place to distribute the food that we have to everybody who needs it. The only thing that stops that from happening is ideas called thoughts. That we can't do it for this reason or that reason, or geopolitics or money or resource, whatever. They're all just ideas. And those ideas have to change and have to shift. And they shift and change through prayer. And so one of the ways our relationship is maintained through the earth, one of the symbolic ways we can look at how our relationship with the earth is maintained It's through our connection with our good, the connection with our source. And the way that shows up in scripture stories is through the telling of stories of bread. Bread, right? Because again, remember what happens when you go from nomadic to farming. Suddenly you can produce a surplus of bread. And when you produce a surplus of bread, which is the main food staple in that era, I know today we're all like gluten-free, and I don't do that, and blah, blah, blah. But bear with me a moment, okay? Back then, bread was really important, all right? Just hold your lettuce-wrapped judgment. And let's just talk about bread for a minute. Good old-fashioned bread. Amen. And so bread was the source of life, and it was the source of the economy. It was the source of everything. And so you go from nomadic living to farming. You suddenly create a surplus of that bread. You then have to store that bread. The population could grow. Somebody has to control those supply chains. Then government comes into place. And now bread suddenly becomes a highly politicized idea. Who has it and who doesn't? And this is why when we talk about prayer, and Jesus, the disciples asked Jesus, well, how do we pray? And he says, pray like this. And I could do a whole sermon, and someday I will, but I want to be brief here today. But he gives what we call the Lord's Prayer. And there's a line in there that says, give us this day our daily bread. Now, that's a very strange line, actually, in relationship to what we're talking about, because the giving of daily bread would have been the job of the government. Would have been the job of the cities. It would have been the job of the principalities that you belong to, of the pharaohs. And so if Jesus is having to remind people to pray in a way that says, give me this day my daily bread, then, and if people are following him, wandering, by the way, there's that key word again, right? Wandering in the desert with him, and by the thousands, and his disciples saying, oh, by the way, all these people have followed us and they're kind of hungry and we need to do something, right? Then what we're reading in between the lines of the text is that somewhere along the way, there's a distribution problem. There's a distribution problem with the bread. Because Mother Earth already knows, and the society has already grown from nomadic to farming to big cities. It knows how to produce enough bread to feed everybody. That's not the issue. But there's a distribution or control issue happening, and suddenly people aren't getting enough bread. And so Jesus has to say, you need to remember that your good comes from heaven. Your good comes from God. Your good comes from an infinite source. Remember this day. Give us this day our daily bread. If you further break down that prayer, which you learn is all kinds of things, but the prayer kind of has two halves to it. The first half, two halves, like a piece of bread. The top half is about the name of God and calling the name holy, the kingdom of God and the will of God. Name, kingdom, and will are the themes in the first half. And the second half, the themes are bread, debt, and trespasses, right? Temptations. Bread, debt, and temptations. In other words, the prayer is like a perfect consciousness sandwich. Come on, who's hungry already? The two pieces are talking to each other, right? And the first half is saying, right, by the way, oh gosh, highly politicized prayer that Jesus has given. I love it when people say, don't talk politics in the pulpit. And I'm like, it's really difficult because politics are just ideas and just forms of consciousness. And this prayer that Jesus gave is probably the most politicized thing he could have said at the time. And he says, right, when he says, our Father who art in, first of all, our, plural. Our, belonging to everyone. Our Father, Abba, the intimate, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, which would have been to the ears hearing it a politicized statement to say, instead of the name of Caesar or Herod or the pharaohs, or hallowed be the name of the Father that belongs to all of us, the divine intelligence that belongs to all of us. Praise that before you praise the current government officials. It's a highly politicized statement. Then to say, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's interesting that the goal there, I never understood how Christianity got so off track, because the goal in the prayer is to bring heaven to earth, not to get to heaven. It's to bring heaven to earth, right? Thy kingdom come on earth as it already is in heaven, meaning the kingdom that the government's trying to establish forget about that. Forget about trying to get another king. Forget trying to get another ruler that's going to make it all right. Forget about all of those things, and focus on the will of God coming into earth. And the will of God is harmony. The will of God is love. The will of God is infinite supply. The will of God is abundance for all people. The will of God is there's a divine intelligence that connects all of us. Bring that into your prayer. Bring that into your activity and your consciousness. Bring that. We want to bring it here. We want heaven and earth to match each other. And then the second half of the prayer focuses on bread and debt and transgressions, or temptations, rather. The transgressions is the debt. Bread, debt, and temptations. In other words, the first half is about your connection with the divine. The second half is about your connection to each other. Remember that your source comes from God. Remember to forgive each other. And remember to not be tempted into thinking yourself separate from the divine. Right? Don't be tempted into thinking that lead me not into temptation. And so God isn't going to lead you into temptation, but it's to say, keep me from my own consciousness that sometimes wanders off the path. Keep me from my own thoughts that forgets that there is a power in the universe greater than I am, and I can use it. Right? Keep me from the temptation that thinks that I got to go out there to get my good, but it's already within me. Because when he said, give us this day our daily bread, he was reminding people where they came from. He said, remember when you were emancipated and you were on the road, you were on the desert, in the desert for 40 years, you couldn't let the bread rise, you were still fed every day. God took care of it, right? Because you acted in faith. You understand what I'm saying? And so bread becomes highly politicized. Mother Earth can take care of everyone, but it's the distribution that needs to be corrected. There's enough money to fix the Bahamas. There's enough money to fix the Carolinas. There's enough money to get clean water, for God's sakes, about time in Flint, Michigan. Right? Why haven't we done that yet? It's a distribution issue of ideas and consciousness, and the way we change consciousness is through prayer, and to remember to bring it into our own being so that it changes our behavior. You see, here's I'll give you another little secret of mine about how I view the Bible. I don't think Jesus fed 5,000 people. Plus women and children, right? The crowd was much larger than that. Let me show you what I think he did. They said, this whole crowd has followed you, and they're kind of hungry. And Jesus turns to his disciples and he says, what do you have? That's all he did. He said, what do you have? In a collective consciousness where there was fear and there's obviously a distribution issue going on with the bread from the government, and people were in a lack and scarcity mentality, he reminded people, you have something. I know you think you don't have anything, but you've got something. Share what you do have. And I think what happened was he said, share what do you have? And people went, oh, I don't think I have anything. But, oh, you know what? I do have a little bit. I got a little bit of bread here. And somebody else got a little bit of fish. And then I think that conversation, like the game telephone, just kept going. And the next group of people, it went down to them. And they said, well, actually, what do you have? And what did he say over there anyway? I can't hear. I'm way back here. And he asked the person what he had. Oh, well, actually, what I have. And then the other person said, what did he say? I couldn't hear over there, that group. What's happening over there? Oh, they asked you what he had. What do you have? Oh, okay. Well, you know what? I've got something. And then I can't hear. I'm way here in the back. What's going on up there? They asked everybody to get out what they had. And suddenly, everybody gave a little bit of what they had, and everybody had something. It multiplied because suddenly the distribution problem was fixed. No, come on, Jesus. Lord have mercy. And the distribution problem was fixed because the consciousness of love was so centered in his beingness, and they were already filled up with love from following and listening to him, that it just flowed through them. You see, the distribution issue is fixed. And now let's talk about our kind of prayer. Let's talk about affirmative prayer. Let's talk about spiritual mind treatment. Affirmative prayer is about facing the conditions, connecting to source, owning our good, and then releasing it. And if you break down those steps, the recognition, unification, realization, thanksgiving, and release, or as I like to just do the initials of those, are you ready to receive, right? Are you, right? Recognition, unification, ready, realization, to receive, thanksgiving, and release. Are you ready to receive, which is a great question to ask before you go into affirmative prayer, right? The R and the U are about our connection to the divine. Remembering our connection to source, remembering that there's an infinite supply, there's a power in the universe greater than I am, and I am connected to it. And then the realization, the thanksgiving, and the release is about how I'm being in the world, what I'm seeing, what I'm affirming, what I'm knowing, my thanksgivingness for it. Why is Thanksgiving important? Because when you say thank you, you claim ownership of something. And then you can release it and let it go because you already have it. And so there's a beautiful prayer sandwich. Just like in the Lord's Prayer, right? Recognition and unification, and then how we're being in the world, and the next 3 steps. But there's something really important as it relates to stewardship of the earth and addressing human conditions, where Jesus gave a prayer that's called the Lord's Prayer that I think is a prayer of a universal formula. Holmes added something to the power of affirmative prayer that is about the particular. And I said that when we examine the particular, we can find the universal. There's a step, and we cover this in the foundations class in another week or two, that we'll get to this piece. And there's a step that in the foundations class we talk about that before you even go into recognition, you have to identify what the condition is that you want changed. You name it, not to give it power, but so that you know what you're praying about. And you get very specific. The condition is this. And what I would like to see is this. Now you've framed the context for the content of the prayer. Come on, somebody. That was a tie back to way back 20 minutes ago. You've framed the context to say, my mind is focused on and is aware and connected to that the condition is this, and I'd like to see it do this. Sometimes I think we forget that step and we just move right into recognition and unification, and we just do the beautiful prayer, and it's just a nice prayer, and it's, oh, thy will be done, and oh, it's lovely, and la, la, la. And we haven't named anything yet. And I think sometimes we got to remember the power of naming something, even naming the condition. We got to name racism. We got to name homophobia. We got to name environmental degradation. We got to name problems as problems. As I got into a little dialogue with somebody on Facebook about some politics thing, not unusual for me, and the person was a conservative, and they said, well, the liberals just always speak so ugly to me, and, always calling me names and all of these things. And so I made a commitment to this person. I said, you won't ever find me. I will gladly engage in vigorous debate about ideas and morality and integrity in politics, but I will never degrade who you are as a human being for having an idea that's different than mine. And this person came back, well, all these other people have done that. And I said, well, that's unfortunate that happens, right? And it shouldn't happen. I said, but right now we have somebody, and I didn't go into all this detail, but you can imagine. I said, we have political leaders who have built their careers on that idea, right? Of the degradation of others to build up their platform. I said, we have to stop, I can't even think of a word. We got to stop recognizing that. We've got to stop allowing that to be somebody's political platform, the degradation of other people. We've got to stop rewarding. That's the word I was trying to look for. So not in my consciousness to reward that kind of behavior that I couldn't think of the word. We've got to stop rewarding that. So that's not a political position. How much you hate somebody else is not a political position. That's just ugliness. Right? Now, so so what I said is we got to call ugly ugly. We got to call it out. I'm not calling you ugly. I'm just saying that behavior is ugly. Right? We got to call it what it is, so that we then say, okay, but you're attacking me. No. I just don't like ugly behavior. Right? If I'm a parent, I say, and my kid is running through the house, I am a parent. Let me be theoretical about it for a minute. Right? If my kid's running through the house with scissors, and I take away the scissors and say, that's dangerous, I don't want you to do that, right? I'm not attacking the person. I'm changing the behavior. Saying that behavior is not safe, that behavior is not good. If my child is calling other children ugly names, I would correct my child and say, that's not what we do in this house. I'm not attacking you, I'm criticizing the behavior. Why? So that you can be a better human being, and that we can have a better system that gets us back to the first law of nature, which is harmony. Oh my God, look at you all. We must get, Ernest Holmes Beck in The Creative Mind says, we must get the perfect vision, the perfect conception. We must enlarge our thought until it realizes all good. And then we must swing right out and use this almighty power for a definite purpose. We should daily feel a deeper union with life, a greater sense of that indwelling God, the God of everywhere, is within us. I'm going to say that again. We must get the perfect vision, the perfect conception. We must enlarge our thought until it realizes all good. Oh, love this part. And then we must swing right out and use this almighty power for a definite purpose. That's the part. We must get the conception. We must get the idea that a world can work for everyone. We must get the idea that there's enough wisdom and intelligence in the universe and within us to heal any of our problems with the environment, to heal our relationship, our broken relationship with the environment around us, to return to being good stewards and living in harmony with the earth, to get that perfect conception and then swing right out and use it. Put it into action. Have a clear idea of where we're directing it. Name the condition. Identify how you want to see that condition changed and transformed. And then you begin to see things. You begin to see that there's a young person somewhere who just recently created a bacteria that will eat plastic. Right? Because there's a creative, infinite intelligence in the universe flowing through us. I've seen things online where they're starting to generate power with big floating buoys that simply take the energy of the ocean and use that to generate power, right? I mean, there's an infinite, I know somebody, a friend of our spiritual leader, Dr. Ken Gordon, a friend of his in Canada, has created a machine that can, in the most arid, dry climates, a machine that costs, he says, about $250 to create and is smaller than this podium, can create potable water by pulling the moisture out of the air. Right? It's already been created. He can't get it distributed anywhere that it needs to go. Why? Politics and all these people that want control over it and won't want it to do it for this reason or that reason. But those are ideas that are simply forms of consciousness that prayer can change. So love in action is about returning to harmony. Love in action is about asking ourselves on a daily basis, how can that be used for a greater purpose? Love in action is about returning to nature and cooperating with it so that it and our spirit might emancipate us. Love in action is about being lifted into that greater idea, remembering where we've come from and remembering each other in the process. It's the wisdom of Cain and Abel, and it's the wisdom of this moment in the Bahamas and in all of life around us. And so with this, I ask the practitioners to rise and find a spot throughout the room where you can hold consciousness of the people around you, and join me in a collective presence of prayer, a prayer that changes things, because it changes consciousness first. And so we begin with a breath, deepening ourselves into a center of divine knowing. Speaking an affirmative word. Knowing that the condition that we wish to change is the condition of disharmony and dis-ease in the disassociated relationship that we have with Mother Earth. And what I seek to see is a relationship that returns to harmony, that returns to balance, that returns to love and respect. And so with that framed in my consciousness, I now speak this word, knowing that there is one power, one presence, one life, one infinite presence of all, that is the infinite intelligence of the universe, one dynamic source of infinite good, and that I am one with that loving presence. I am one with this divine wisdom. I'm one with this infinite intelligence. I'm one with all that this source is. And it moves through and as me now, speaking this word and declaring that the relationship between the human and the divine is an intimate one. The relationship between the human and nature is an infinite one. And this relationship, even as we speak, is being restored through the breath. It's being healed through the connection of our body, that we ground ourselves in the body temple and remember who we are and where we've come from, that we are connected with each other. And like the great aspen forest that sways and breathes as one body, that looks like many different trees on the surface, yet under the root system is all connected. Or the largest living organisms on earth, the mighty redwoods in California, who similarly sway and speak as mighty giants of individuality, but beneath the surface, the root systems reach out, wrap around each other, and hold each other up. The only reason that any of them are able to stand is because their roots are holding on to each other, pulling and supporting the whole community. And so I know now that deep within the human heart, there are roots going deep from our breath into Mother Earth, reaching out and holding each other up in the Bahamas, holding each other up in Flint, Michigan, holding each other up for the hungry right here in Atlanta, holding each other up for our own community and our own brothers and sisters in the spiritual living center of Atlanta. And that our hearts are opened up to the infinite wisdom and divine creative intelligence that says, how can we be in harmony and right relationship with the world around us once more? How can we repair, restore, and renew that which has been broken, lost, or damaged? For there is a healing power within us, a healing power of God, of spirit, of infinite intelligence, and it restores us the moment that we open ourselves to it. And so I speak this word knowing that there's divine intelligence flowing forth as creative ideas that bring forward greater levels of respect and harmony with our food supply and with the weather conditions and with everything around us. Oh, we're seeking greater and greater levels of harmony right now. And as we seek it as a human family, it seeks us, and we conspire together for our emancipation. For this and so much more, the divine truth of this word, knowing that it goes forth into the activity of our life as the experience that we have day by day, moment by moment. I see it everywhere. I expect to see it everywhere. And I am seeing it everywhere. For this and so much more, I give thanks as I release and simply allow it to be. And together we say, so it is. Thank you. Peace and blessings.